He covers the Denver Nuggets for DNVR.com. We welcome back Brendan Vogt onto Hoopsology. Welcome back, Brendan.
Fellas, been a minute. Good to be back. We got a lot to talk about, it looks like.
We do, and good to have you on. And I want to just hop into it right now. And I was reading the column that DNVR put up there, which featured your expert analysis just about the expectations of the Nuggets. And something that really stood out to me, which is what you said about Jamal Murray. And you said that he has the most at stake in terms of this playoff run. Can you explain why?
Sure. I think it's been almost glossed over a bit, especially here in Denver. There's a lot of Jokic legacy talk, and Michael Malone, understandably long tenured head coach. If they don't get it done, maybe some changes are on the horizon. What about the second best player? And I'm not in any rush to get Jamal Murray out of town or anything, but when you think about the bubble, it was a long time ago now. And the injuries are not his fault. But at this stage in his career, Murray has yet to win an all-star game. And the Nuggets, in some people's eyes, have underachieved. So if you look at a player like Jokic, he's not going to get it looks like, but nearing back-to-back-to-back MVPs, excuse me, fellas, it's almost due diligence, and it requires thorough consideration of everything, including maybe looking at who the co-stars are out of fairness to Jokic. Not that Murray's necessarily been the wrong guy, but if you come up short in a year in which ownership in the front office thinks you have everything you need to compete, I think just about all options are on the table.
Do you think the fans see it that way? If Nuggets don't reach expectations, will they have the same philosophy? Or
that's a great question. I think there's probably multiple camps in that regard. I know for a fact there are folks who believe in Jamal Murray no matter what happens this postseason, and they would want him on this roster going forward. And now I think there are other folks who would maybe say, look, if they fall short, that might be the next route you consider. Jokic has not played with a co-all-star. Now, past all-stars in Paul Millsap, but he has not shared an all-star game with a teammate. And that's a crazy thing to think about. So if they don't get it done, and I don't mean to be so doomsday, maybe they do, fellas. But if they don't, I think you are having tough conversations this far into the whole Jokic era.
Brendan, what do you kind of define as get it done? Like, is that like a push to the finals? Is that Western Conference Finals? What kind of level are you talking about there?
That's another good question. I think this is another one where I think probably folks in Denver are of different minds. I would imagine if it's a competitive Western Conference Finals, Game 6, Game 7, those are really tough discussions internally. Do you just run it back? How close were they? I think if you lose in the second round, even to a team like Phoenix, it starts to get dicey. Michael Malone, for example, maybe Murray. This group has been together for a long time, and this is the first one seed the team has ever had. This is full systems go here. They believe they have an opportunity. They believe they're good enough. So I think anything less than conference finals should be viewed as a disappointment. The team has never made the finals in their NBA history. So if they win the West, I would think everyone's safe, even if they fail to win there. But I think we're about at Western Conference Finals territory.
I guess my concern, as you know, the Nuggets aren't my team, but I certainly root for them. They're close. Me being in Albuquerque, they're very close regionally. So I want them to succeed and do well. It's just such a tough draw to get the Phoenix Suns in the second round. Wanted to ask your thoughts. I mean, assuming both teams are healthy on paper, do you see the Suns right now the Vegas favorites to get out of the Western Conference Finals? But Justin and I were just talking a few minutes ago about the inconsistency that they've had in the postseason. You know, Chris Paul's health always being in question, along with some of the other guys on this roster this season. Do you think on paper, if everyone's healthy, I mean, there are advantages that aren't being talked about that the Nuggets have against them?
That's an interesting way to frame it. Yes, I think the Nuggets probably have a better sense of who they are in crunch time all these years later. Phoenix, I mean, Kevin Durant is a very malleable superstar. It's not that difficult to figure out how to play with him, as they evidenced in those games they did get together. But from a Nuggets perspective, I think you take solace in the fact that they have not had this full season together. It is very difficult, very rare to make that big splash at the trade deadline and get it all done in that same year. You know, especially in an era where guys are not practicing. Again, do I expect Phoenix to look just fine, more or less. But when it comes down to fourth quarters, I would think chemistry, identity, there's a chance Denver has a leg up there. Now, the Nuggets also have a handful of new guys on the roster, but the fourth quarter reps, what it looks like, the two-man game with Jokic and Murray, these guys have been in these battles together. They've been in countless game sevens together. So, in that sense, I think they're probably looking at the whole starting five, the chemistry there, and thinking maybe this adds up to something more than the star power in Phoenix. The Nuggets are not the deepest team out west. Their bench has struggled, but I think they're deeper than Phoenix after that trade. There are some rotation players for the Suns that probably wouldn't factor into the playoffs, had they not traded for Kevin Durant. So I think you look in those areas.
What is the expectations of the locker room specifically? I mean, players, they're known for not, giving their hands away in terms of their actual feelings. But I think this year is different in terms of how the Nuggets have performed, the potential for a three-peat, for the Joker as MVP. Like, what are their expectations in that locker room? Are they expecting themselves just to, be in the finals, or are they just tempering expectations, you think?
I think the older guys in the locker room, and which for the Nuggets can also just mean Jokic and Jamal, by the way. They are the veterans at this point. But I would say that they're a bit more candid about the opportunity at hand, what they want to accomplish, what they think they can accomplish. The word championship has been thrown around since training camp. But I also think there is an element of wanting to be about it more than talk about it this season. And so if they've been restrained to sort of throw that word around lately, it's probably been through that vein kind of, right? I think they'd rather be about their business here than state the goal. I do think the expectation is championship. It's funny, Michael Porter Jr., kind of a younger guy, he was a little more hesitant to throw the word championship on the expectations. But I get the sense that Jamal, Jokic, and most of the team understand exactly what this opportunity is.
Is that a good strategy in terms of laying those expectations out? I've heard different philosophies where you say championship or a bust, and it's like too much pressure if you don't, kind of cutting yourself short. Like, what is your take on that? Do you think that's a good strategy, just to say, hey, we don't make the NBA finals, the season's a failure? Or
yeah. Well, you'll notice that how many folks in the organization really try to shy away from that line. And that's, I think, maybe more where we in the media take it. But having said that, Josh Kroenke, effectively the owner of the Denver Nuggets, said it's a championship or bust season. I think they crossed a threshold with so many years with the same core and the same coach, where now this conversation is appropriate. It's healthy pressure because they should view this as like, it's time. This is their best chance. And I think maybe over the years that pressure could have forced an unwise trade or a coaching change before it was necessary. But again, I think we're at the crossroads now where if they can't get it done this year, you really got to think long and hard about why that is.
Yeah, I think especially when you see what Giannis has accomplished on the Bucks, you have Jokic accomplishing similar individual feats on the Nuggets. And they have all this continuity. I think that's totally fair. Wanted to get your thoughts. I know it's an old topic at this point, but we haven't gotten to speak with someone covering the Nuggets specifically about the MVP race. What have you kind of seen in Denver? I mean, for me personally, I'll just give you my quick thoughts. I thought we had 3 players deserving of MVP this year. I thought, for me, Jokic being an offense gives him a little bit of advantage because of the demands placed on him. I thought Embiid, of course, is fantastic. It seems to me like he's probably going to lock it up and get that vote. But what were your thoughts just on the MVP race overall and sort of the perceptions and takes that you saw on that?
Yeah, it definitely got ugly this year. It got less fun than ever to be a part of it, which was, it's kind of an interesting debate in Denver. Do we care about the MVP? Because Jokic's back-to-back MVPs came in this weird sort of purgatory stretch where expectations were minimal, for some folks non-existent, with the injuries Denver had. And so the MVPs were almost so detached from their journey to a potential championship and had so little to do with the end goal and the winning that at the start of the season, should we even care? Because does he even care? Does the team even care? I wanted to because it's fun. We talk about sports, for a living at DNVR.
For sure.
It's, if you can't have an MVP conversation, I think it's a little weird. Most people want to have that conversation.
Of course.
So I wanted to care, but I ended up having such a hard time doing it for several reasons. I think there was an unspoken agreement not to get weird about the race thing with Jokic. Like everyone knows how the internet goes. And it was like a delicate thing that no one touched. And then Perk just took a sledgehammer to the dam and ruined discourse for everyone for a few months. So that was tough. And then I think it kind of broke Jokic's heart a little bit. I'm speaking for him when I shouldn't. That's definitely not a quote, but I think it's real that I don't want to say threw it away, but I think he geared down for sure. I don't think he wanted to be at the heart of the conversation if that was the cost. And I do think in his mind, there was a little bit, all right, that's old stuff. Let's just go win the title. I wish it had been more fun. Also, it's really cool that it's three bigs, the finalists again, not just the finalists, but the only three guys who really were ever truly up for the award. In the 3-point era, now Embiid takes jumpers, but these are three guys that do not live and die by the three. It's such a cool thing to see them dominating. And Embiid to finally get it should be this thing that's celebrated and not this weird, like, oh, he really wanted it. And there was this sympathy thing. And I do think he really wanted it, but I also think he deserved it. So I think everyone was done a disservice by the way it all spiraled down the drain.
Yeah, it's sort of this weird, I don't know if it just seems like, I don't know, like you're not being humble if you just come out and say you want to win MVP. I mean, what player doesn't want to be MVP? Like, can we just be real?
Right. I like that you brought that up because Jokic, I think to whatever extent you doesn't, but I also think that can be overstated. Like, I don't think he hated that he won them. I'll tell you that.
Nobody would say he's unselfish.
Right. So I actually didn't like, of all the things, because unfortunately you just you pit camps against each other, right? And so even in the media, it becomes a bit of like, oh, those Embiid and those Philly people over there. But I actually think it's cool that Embiid wants it.
Yeah,
I don't see any problem with that. I like that he took that head-to-head matchup in Philly so seriously. I wish he had played the Denver one, but I don't think there's any shame in wanting it. I will say just what it became to represent, what it began to represent, was I think something that Jokic eventually just wanted nothing to do with.
Is that a negative though? Something that you said really stood out to me in terms of that criticism and the pressure. You kind of geared down, and we don't usually see athletes do that. You usually see criticism motivate them, and in this case, it did the opposite. So, in a case of a lot of pressure, especially if the Nuggets get past the Suns, and if they, are in the NBA Finals, and then, there's what if people are saying, hey, Giannis is the clear better player than the Joker. Like, is that going to get to him? Like, is that a concern? Not so much about MVP, but just his psyche generally when everything's on the line, Game 7, where there's so much pressure.
Great question. I think it's a fair sort of area to examine in terms of a potential criticism. On the first layer of it, just on a very small surface layer, I would say yes. I would say the difference between Jokic and Giannis, more so everyone would say defense. Of course, that exists. But the bigger difference just in terms of night-to-night impact, again, Jokic is a back-to-back MVP, so let me not get carried away with any criticism. But there are just games where Jokic decides he's like, look, this isn't, in the grand scheme of things, this is not important. And you can see his play sort of follow suit. Whereas I think there is an expectation with Giannis, or even in March. If you take the court alongside Giannis in March or October, he's going to play just as hard, from the start of the game to the end. And I think as a role player, it drags some of that out of you as well. Whereas part of the reason I think maybe why the Nuggets are prone to letting their foot off the gas every now and then, shorter win streaks, I think that's a reflection of their best player. Now, to bring it back to the specific question you asked, I don't think this would rear its head when we're talking about what does matter, winning time. Winning matters very much to Jokic. And so I think the whole point is that the MVP award, a cool thing to win, has nothing to do with winning itself. And for him, that validation came when they were not winning any playoff series. So what the hell does he care, especially if it's going to become a race issue? Game 7, he will care. I promise you that. And that stuff will motivate him. I think this time around, it's just maybe in his mind more to lose than gain by leaning into the whole dynamic.
Yeah, I just think from like a fan perspective, just NBA fan in general. I mean, we had, Brendan, I don't know how old you are, but Justin and I certainly like raised on 90s basketball, like kind of the tail end of those center rivalries and things like that. How cool would it have been just from a fun, competitive standpoint if, Embiid is saying, I want MVP, and Jokic is saying, like, I'll see you in Denver, come get it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, just, not any sort of negative, not threatening type of thing, but just a competitive man-to-man athletic competition thing, which is what we're all here for in the NBA anyway.
No, I think it would have been 11. Awesome. I think it would have been awesome. It's a weird thing because I don't know how much this detracts from Jokic's mindset and ability to win a title.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But I think from the fan kind of watching 82 games, just hoping for the most competitive, Jokic, I think, can gear down in ways that can be a bit disappointing. I mean, he also won back-to-back MVPs and very nearly won a third. He's unbelievable, and he does mostly bring it every night. But I think the whole thing, from the discourse to the media, the basketball, I think it starts to get a little exhausting for him in a way that, like, Giannis seems to have an insatiable appetite for the whole thing, not just the work and the basketball, but talking to the media, being in the national spotlight,
Agreed,
doing the Google ads. And I do think for Jokic, there's a much stronger sense of like, all right, man, when do the playoffs start? Enough with the other stuff. So it's, again, does it make him less of a winner? I don't think so. But it makes him a different guy to follow through something like an MVP race for sure.
So this discussion is very fascinating because I think it leads to my next question of basically if they don't win the title and if they fall short of expectations, even, I think in sports there we have like expectations and then they exceed expectations, but ultimately if they don't win the championship, there is disappointment there. So there's a point to where they're in the finals and we see Giannis and Jokic meet up and Giannis gets the better of him, even though they had a great season and in the first appearance in the NBA finals, Giannis gets the better of him. That's how the sports narrative will take place in terms of second guessing him. So do you think long-term wise, he is, I guess I don't want to use, I'm going to try not to say that because I think that's disrespectful. But do you think with the Joker in the future, he can, I guess, withstand the criticism if they fell short? Because to me, it just seems to me like I'm worried that ultimately this him not winning the big one, quote unquote, will ultimately lead him to leave Denver, which would be such a shame because I think he's such a great pillar for this team and great for the NBA for him being, with this franchise. But at the same time, like you said, all these expectations, the whole narrative of back to back, and then ultimately the championship, he falls short. And you see, compared to Giannis, where it motivated him, I have serious questions whether or not his future with this team is going to be solidified, just from his perspective and from the franchise itself.
I'm glad you asked that question because I'd like to sort of clean up exactly what it was I was trying to articulate. Criticism doesn't rattle Jokic in a vacuum. I think specifically the race stuff. I think being attached to that bumped him out in a way. Again, I cover Jokic for a living. I am not in his inner circle.
Sure.
So these are guesses. These are some projections. Some of it he tells us in the scrums, right? But just to be clear, I don't want to speak for the guy. But I do think that stuff made him uncomfortable, that particular element of it. And again, like when it comes down to it, what is a third MVP award, especially if you haven't won anything? So it just doesn't. I think this is where some of the European basketball mindset is clicking. Like he simply has a different value system than we do. We love the MVP stuff. He doesn't. He just doesn't. I don't think he minds winning it. I think it's fun and cool, but he's not wired that way, if that makes sense. I don't think the very notion of criticism upsets him. I actually think he doesn't catch most of it. He's not particularly online. I'm sure people in his life are, and they send it to him and all that. But I think he's a very, like, his life is pretty contained to the stuff he's interested in and the stuff he likes. So I don't know if the noise really breaks him down that much. I think it was specifically what the conversation was that turned him off. The leaving Denver part, I think every mid to small market person has said this about the respective star in town. I'd be blown away if Jokic ever leaves. And I think part of it is this. He's not just Serbian, he's from Sombor. He's like a slow, rural Serbian. Like Jokic is, so whatever like LeBron James in LA is, Jokic is on the very far end of the spectrum. And he is settled in Denver and he knows where he can go and find his peace and quiet, right? He knows what his spots are. He knows who to reach out for. He knows how to be a star without being a celebrity in this town. And I don't think he would ever start that process over, honestly. I think things would have to go so poorly here for him to feel like it's worth it to uproot his life and do the American transplant thing all over again from scratch. Because I do think, like I said earlier, I think he just finds so much of this exhausting. And that is, I think that's more the fear than is he going to leave? There's always the back of your mind, like, does he like this? You know, how long is he going to keep doing this? I think the basketball part itself, he likes enough that we don't have to worry about it. But I think he stays in Denver probably for his entire career.
And I think that is interesting because it kind of ties in line, you know, with Giannis extending with the Bucks when that was kind of unexpected to some folks in the media when he signed that long-term extension. You know, Damian Lillard has been in Portland for his whole career to this point. Now I know there's talk just about every offseason with Damian Lillard, it seems. But do you think it's kind of becoming a trend more and more so in the NBA for maybe a greater probability that these stars stay put to their franchises?
Oh, I wonder that. Yeah, I think the younger generation maybe seems they just seem to generally be bucking the kind of LeBron era way of business, you know, and they're not. This is what happens when you've been in the league for 40,000 years, like LeBron has. But you look at Memphis, like those guys aren't. Maybe they had his poster on his wall at some point on their walls, but they're not scared of him, right? And they're talking trash, and they're not. And I think the whole like super team thing, like guys like John and guys like Anthony Edwards, I'm really curious to see how they handle it because they seem to be wired a little differently. It's comments about wanting the league to be more competitive in terms of playing and availability at All-Star break. I loved that. Now it's very easy for a 21-year-old, you know, number one overall pick. Like I'm sure his body feels fine, but I just his attitude. I'm curious to see if that is a reflection of maybe a general attitude shift for the next generation. We don't want super teams. We don't need to move around 100 times. You know, I rep this city. Let's go get it done.
I wonder too, do you think Dirk Nowitzki and what he did in Dallas has a big impression on Jokic? I mean, I know Jokic, Serbian, Nowitzki from Germany, but European that came over, stuck with that one franchise, got it done. He's got a statue in front of that arena, of course, and is an icon in Dallas. I mean, it seems like in a lot of cases, I wonder if it's better quality of life wise and some of the things that you mentioned with Jokic and what he prefers. I mean, to be a legend in Denver, play there your whole career sounds appealing to me, but I know maybe not all stars have the same sensibility, certainly, or opportunity.
Well, we use the Dirk comp a lot, you know, particularly because I think should Jokic even just get one in Denver, it will have that kind of effect on his career. No one criticizes Dirk anymore. No one. And it's funny, if you get up to 3 or 4, you almost enter this territory of like, well, why don't you have 6? You know what I mean? And Dirk is in this almost universally beloved, like no one thought he would get it done there and he got it done, so leave him alone. And you know, Denver in their NBA history, they have never been to a finals. This is their first ever 1 seed. So there's a lot of potential for a Dirk-esque kind of narrative unfolding for Jokic. I think the guy that he himself looks to and the guy he's named the most is Tim Duncan. Same sort of thing in terms of sticking around the whole time. I think the quiet leader thing. But Jokic has mentioned explicitly on more than one occasion that if it were up to him, he would just be the Tim Duncan of the Denver Nuggets. So I think that's where his head is at. I think again, another difference maybe between the American and the European thing, like this concept of team and okay, we fell short this year, but what's the process of not just who do we get in free agency, but what's the process of how do we get better at those things? I think Jokic is kind of obsessed with that stuff in a more, immediate way than almost wins or losses. Just the process of it, I think, is really where he finds the meat on the bone.
I have one last question for you, Brendan, and it's something that you really said it. Really, I want to ask you. And we had Mike Greenberg on, and we talked about sports debate and what you brought about the MVP and about race being factored into it. I think there's a narrative of ESPN that being toxic debate and that not being the actual discourse. But from what you've said, that's actually had a real effect from what Kendrick Perkins has said. I think overall, do you see that changing in terms of the actual discourse of this sports debate in the future? Because what comes to mind, I see JJ Redick, I see him pulling his hair, I see him really trying. I really like JJ Redick. I think he's one of the best analysts of the game, but I see him trying to fight like the machine. Like there's like this demand. He's trying to fight like Stephen A. Smith and Kendrick Perkins and all this like terrible talk, and he's just pulling his hair out. Do you think we'll see more players like him trying to take over this BS narratives that we hear all the time, not only from ESPN, but the sports talk radio as a whole?
It's tough because for every JJ Redick, then there's also the actual literal Kendrick Perkins across the desk.
Exactly.
Or a Ryan Hollins or whatever. And by the way, these guys are entitled to in sports, even with the Jokic thing, which I think it's going to push what I'm about to say to the very limit. I also think if some people just want to be TMZ about whatever. Okay, it's a game. That doesn't do it for me, but I'm not going to get too, moralistic or I don't need to police anyone. I wonder how much it'll change. I don't think that corner of it will ever change. I think debate TV on ESPN is what it is for the foreseeable future. But as you fellas well know, the landscape is just changing every day. In terms of, do you actually watch TV? Is sports media for you something that's entirely digital and online, especially locally? I'm proud of what we do at DNVR, but everyone seems to have some version of, could be the Hoopsology pod, the Locked On network, right? Or the All City network that I work for. There's just all these different options you have to whatever it is that you're looking for in hoops analysis. I think it probably exists somewhere. So I just anticipate more creators stepping up to the plate in other mediums, as we've seen over the last 20 years.
No, completely true. Brendan, thank you very much for joining us. Can you please let our audience know where they can find you on social media, what's new on DNVR, and what other projects you're working on as well?
Sure. Yeah. So thednvr.com is the website. You can follow us at DNVR Nuggets on Twitter. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. But follow us for this playoff run. Pre and post game shows for every Nuggets game, written content. If you are into the Nuggets, we are doing everything we can to bring you content every single day. So check us out. If you're tired of hearing ESPN's version of what's going on in Denver and you just want to know what's actually going on in Denver, we humbly invite you to join us in the DNVR community.
Awesome. Brendan, this has been a great chat. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, fellas. Very fun. Appreciate it.